Hi everyone, my name is Elsie and I'll be starting off with the group presentation. The book we chose is The Body Keeps the Score, Brain, Mind, and Body in the Healing of Trauma by Bessel van der Kolk. Our group number is 4 and our members will now be presenting themselves.
Hi, my name is Kalia Fado.
Hi everybody, my name is Jimmy Arevalo.
Hi guys, it's Christina Rogers.
Hi, my name is Luisa.
Hi, my name is Caitlin.
Hi, I'm Elsie Rodriguez.
Hi, my name is Luz Ramirez.
Hello, my name is Brittany Ritter.
Hello, my name is Kevin Ventura Fernandez.
Hi, my name is Lisbeth Alvara.
Here is an overview of the main points we'll be discussing in our presentation. First, we'll talk about how trauma affects the body neurologically, physically, and physiologically. Second, we'll explore how attachment styles and trauma develop in early childhood. Third, we'll cover how healing requires body-based and integrative approaches. Fourth, we'll discuss specific therapeutic techniques that help reintegrate the mind and body. And finally, we'll explain how trauma affects brain areas involved in survival and emotional regulation. Each of these main points connect back to stress and healing, which will relate to how they can help us manage stress in our lives or when supporting others.
Main point 1, trauma affects the body neurologically, physically, and physiologically. This chapter covers a lot of the stories that were given from Vietnam War veterans that suffered from PTSD, and Bessel van der Kolk began studying trauma through his work with them in the 1970s. One of the things that he was noticing in a recurring pattern was that trauma survivors re-experience the past as if it's happening in reality and not just a memory. So after seeing many veterans come home that were suffering from nightmares, flashbacks, emotional numbness, explosive anger, suicidal thoughts, and feeling lost in their mind, even years after returning home, that was something that van der Kolk noticed. And traditional treatments were ineffective, largely widespread, that people were just becoming disconnected. And as time went on, nothing was helping. There was no diagnosis, there was no cure, or really no help for the veterans that were returning home and suffering for years on end before and after they went to war. It wasn't until eventually that these symptoms became recognized as what we now know as PTSD, which is post-traumatic stress disorder, and that was in 1980, which was added to the DSM-3. And that diagnosis of PTSD really changed the outcome for treatments and research because people finally had an answer. Because it was found that the body and mind both remember the trauma, physiological responses that happen in our body that don't allow the person to forget. So understanding the mind and the brain really changed the outcome for PTSD survivors and the future of understanding the body neurologically, physically, and physiologically. Not only that, he took a look into the brain, which was very important because we needed to understand that healing requires rewiring the brain's response to stress. It's not as easy as talking for some people or getting out of the environment. It really sticks with the person in many, many ways. So going into studies about the amygdala, which is a part of the brain that detects the threats and becomes overreactive in trauma survivors, and going into the parts of the brain that react in certain situations, like the brain's fight or flight, was a key takeaway in a lot of the studies and research that we were able to get to for today. So it's an important reminder that trauma is not psychological, it's neurological and bodily.
So today we're going to be talking about the invisible barrier to student success. It's trauma. It's actually our main point number 1. So we often treat trauma as a bad memory. But research, particularly The Body Keeps a Score, confirms a critical truth. Trauma is a neurological and physiological injury. It's something that the body holds on to. So you might be asking, how does this affect college students? The primary impact is academic sabotage. Trauma permanently overhauls the brain's alarm system, the amygdala. It's always keeping it on high alert. When the brain senses danger, it physically shuts down the prefrontal cortex. This is the area needed for critical thinking, planning, and concentration. A student struggling with trauma isn't being lazy. Oh no. Their brain is biologically prioritizing survival over studying. They literally can't focus on a lecture or textbook because their body is expecting an immediate threat. This chronic alert state leads to physical exhaustion and illness. Students experience unexplained symptoms like migraine, severe fatigue, digestive issues. Their nervous system is running a survival marathon. It basically leads to burnout that disrupts their academic life. When a student struggles, we must recognize that the problem is rooted in the body. Healing requires more than just talking. It requires rewiring the brain's stress response by engaging the body through therapies that help the student feel safe enough to finally learn, connect, and thrive. Understanding trauma can affect the body even years later, which will help classmates recognize physical signs of stress in themselves, such as tension, rapid heartbeat, and they can actually make use of techniques such as deep breathing or being mindful, which will actually calm the body and reduce the stress.
Main point two is that attachment styles and trauma develop in early childhood. Attachment is learned from infancy by our primary caretakers. Separation, even for short periods of time, by young children's caretakers can lead to anxious attachment, meaning they respond to real life experience of neglect, abuse, and separation. This was tested or shown from a thematic apperception test, cards that depict realistic, ambiguous, possibly disturbing scenes. Kids that were abused or experienced trauma described horrific stories based on the shown card, and kids who were not abused were able to come up with a solution or story of ways to get out of a bad situation. Having a secure base, we learn gradually how to care for ourselves, taught by our caregivers. If we are neglected and not properly attended to our needs as a child, we may develop unhealthy coping skills to survive through learned experience. Having a secure environment promotes secure attachment. The more responsible the adult or caregiver is, the better equipped the child is to grow up with healthy relationships. This creates self reliance, sympathy towards others, builds foundation for self awareness, empathy, impulse control, and self motivation. Trauma and neglect can lead to feelings of emptiness and self destructive behavior, ways to cope or to feel alive again. There can be sudden lashing out in anger, aggression, violence, not knowing why, uncontrollably, not remembering what happened, only left later to feel ashamed, horrified, and sometimes unable to go through life. Developmental trauma, some memories or triggers can bring this up. They're trapped deep inside, caused from dissociation. That early signs to look for are physical and physiological responses. So it is important to recognize these signs, behaviors, and be able to reach out for help. If you notice this in yourself or others, ask a friend, a close relative, a mentor, seek some counseling. That way, we're better able to deal with these and develop more healthy coping skills.
An example of main point two is childhood behavioral problems can begin in infancy, shaped by care and biological factors, especially following neglect, abuse, or trauma. As these children mature and grow into adulthood, they may use unhealthy adaptive survival skills, and learning about the long term effects of early attachment can help classmates notice their own stress triggers and patterns in relationships or at work. Practicing self regulation like journaling or seeking support from trusted peers or mentors can help manage the stress.
Main point three of The Body Keeps the Score discusses how healing requires body based approaches and integrative approaches rather than traditional talk therapy used to treat psychological disorders. So, the human body is very complex in the way it stores trauma. The human body stores trauma in a way that's different than a simple memory. Survivors often relive traumatic moments as if it's happening in the present, not not as just a memory. So tension, posture, heart rate, and breathing patterns carry the memory of trauma. A smell, sound, or movement can reactivate physiological responses even without a conscious memory of what exactly happened in the moment of their trauma. So, because of this, talk therapy is not always the best option for trauma survivors, as it can cause patients who remember the specific details of their trauma to re experience it because it's not just a memory. So, trauma, when it's happening, it shuts down areas of the brain responsible for speech and reasoning, like Broca's area, that make it difficult to quote unquote reframe trauma. This makes it difficult, again, to think of trauma as a memory, and survivors more think of it as something that could happen again and can keep on happening and happening, even if there's a very slight chance of it happening to them again. Many trauma survivors don't remember specific details of their traumatic event, and trying to do so can trigger them. Therefore, body based healing exercises may be more impactful for the healing process of PTSD. So, examples of these body based exercises are mindfulness exercises like yoga, stretching, guided breathing, or meditation. All of these exercises can reduce physical tension and promote a sense of safety. They also focus on relieving the physiological effects of trauma and will help slow heart rate, relax your posture, and help your body return to normal breathing patterns. And practicing these exercises can help classmates recognize stress early and help calm themselves before anything further escalates.
Main point four is a very important topic, which consists of specific therapeutic techniques that help reintegrate the mind with the body. Trauma affects the brain and the body, and traditional talk therapy does not tend to be enough to be able to heal from traumatic experiences. Trauma is stored within our body. Specifically, the trauma does like to migrate to our hips. So, having tight hips is a symptom. Treatments such as yoga, which is stretching, EMDR, which is reprogramming of the right and left brain hemispheres, neurofeedback, internal family systems therapy, and body based methods, as well as PBSP, which is a type of role play therapy, are detrimental in being able to heal from the trauma as well as reintegrate the mind and the body together. When we think about therapy, we need to keep in mind that therapy must rebuild awareness to our surroundings, as well as self leadership and feelings of being in control. A lot of trauma survivors tend to disconnect from oneself or even reality around us. So, being able to implement our mind and body connection together is extremely important in being able to heal and process the trauma that our body has held on to.
Examples for main point 4, practicing deep breathing when feeling overwhelmed during exams can calm body stress response by lowering heart rate and tension. When you notice yourself getting anxious before giving a presentation or going out in public, try alternating gentle taps on your left and right shoulders or thighs while slowly breathing. This bilateral stimulation, similar to MDR, can help your brain process stress, shift focus from racing thoughts, and bring you back to the present moment instead of being stuck in a worry about what might go wrong. After a long day, tense day, take 5 minutes to sit or lay down. Place one hand on your chest and the other one on your stomach and breathe deeply while noticing how your body feels. This simple yoga based awareness practice helps you reconnect with your body, release muscle tension, and signal to your nervous system that you're safe and grounded rather than running on autopilot stress.
8.5 Trauma effects on brain areas involved in survival and emotional regulation. Trauma basically rewires the brain stress system and how it interprets outside information. This causes increased activation of the amygdala and decreased activation of other brain areas such as the medial prefrontal cortex, which makes it difficult for one to regulate emotions. The amygdala receives information from the thalamus and basically acts as a smoke detector. When it's sensing danger, it activates the stress response system, triggering the release of stress hormones such as cortisol and adrenaline, increasing heart rate and blood pressure. Decreasing activation of the MPFC makes it harder to evaluate incoming information and controlling or suppressing the amygdala fear responses. In people with PTSD, the amygdala is usually more hyperactive, while the medial prefrontal cortex is deactivated, which causes the brain to stay in high alert for most of the time, known as hypervigilance, making it difficult to control emotions due to more intense reactions or impulses when triggered. When triggering past traumatic stress, it automatically causes a fight, flight, or freeze state, depending on past experiences. People with PTSD are often more sensitive prone to any cues that trigger a response, such as being easily startled, easily angry, or frustrated, or hypersensitive when being touched. These responses can often lead to dissociation, which is basically someone detaching from themselves, their thoughts, or emotions as a way to cope, reducing their self awareness. This could happen more frequently as they are more sensitive to triggers, activating more stress responses, making them more prone to dissociation. Another effect is alexithymia, where it makes it difficult for one to describe feelings or identify physical sensations.
So, how do we self regulate our emotions if our own trauma is causing a flight or freeze response? So, when someone starts to have a flight reaction, they can use grounding techniques like deep breathing, progressive muscle relaxation, or mindful movement to calm the body. So, walking. When someone begins to dissociate or freeze, they can try gentle self awareness exercises, journaling, or talking to a trusted friend. If someone starts feeling like they're in danger during a disagreement because they grew up in a yelling household, they can use grounding techniques like deep breathing to stay calm. They can feel the ground through their feet. They can notice textures around them to stay present. So, understanding how trauma affects the brain can help others recognize their own response and develop a better strategy or technique to regulate their emotions.
Now, let's look at our group's individual ratings. Our ratings ranged from 70 to 100, with most of us giving the book scores in the 80s and 90s, and our overall group's average came out to 83. As a group, we really liked how the book connects to psychology, neuroscience, and personal stories in a way that's both engaging and easy to understand. The real life examples made the concepts feel meaningful and relatable. We also appreciate its message of hope that healing for trauma is possible and that it can take many different forms. As for dislikes, we agreed that it's an intense read. The amount of information can feel overwhelming at times. Despite that, we would recommend this book to others. It completely reshapes how readers think about mental health, trauma, and recovery. We believe it's an important read for anyone who has experienced trauma or wants to better understand how healing works. And finally, here's our APA Styles reference for this book. And that is all. Thank you for listening.